Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending this administrative presentation of the data team analysis of Georgia High School graduation testing data for Woods Mill High School, covering the years 2010-11 through 2013-14. Before we get started, there's some things we need to discuss. The classifications of races that we're using in here were taken directly from the Georgia DOE website. They're not the classifications I would use, but since that is what the state of Georgia uses, we've gone with that. Wherever you see the term Gainesville City, that's referring to the City of Gainesville School District. And when you're looking at the data for the 2013-14 school year, we didn't put nearly as much weight on that because the retest data for that year isn't in yet, so there's a lot less data. Plus, as the graduation test is being phased out, you'll notice the numbers of students being tested every year has gone way down. So by the time we're into 13-14, it's a much smaller N value. So, why are we here? The main reason we're here is to highlight areas of strength and areas that need improvement at Woods Mill High School. When we're looking at the data, remember that even though the Georgia High School graduation test is being phased out, hopefully this will point to some areas that we do need to focus on as a school moving forward. And we're trying to find an area of concern for the data team to discuss an action plan moving forward so that we can hopefully increase student achievement. So let's start with a little bit of overview of the school at Woods Mill. Looking at the academy as a whole, which is the 612 school, not just the high school, our percentage of English language learners, you can see, is generally trending upwards, and we're up to about 18% ELL from the 7% we started with in 2010. Our percentage of economically disadvantaged students really hasn't changed. We've been, above 60%, in the 60 to 75% area every year. And if you look at the percentage of students classified as remedial, you'll see that has grown sharply since 2010. We may want to take a bit of a view of the 2010 data as possibly being underreported, since that was the second year that the school was in existence and we didn't have a full-time counselor. There may be students there who were remedial but weren't coded that way. But you can see that our percentage of remedial students is well above 70% and has been above 80% for the last 2 years. Alright, now that we have an idea of what the school layout looks like, let's go ahead and get into some of the data on the graduation testing. We're going to start out with the language arts test, and you can see we have a table of all the results from 2010 all the way up through the latest 2013-14 results. And as I stated earlier, if you look at the total number tested, you can see statewide there were 123,000 students tested in 2010-11 school year, only 6,500 students tested last year. So as they're phasing out the test, the numbers are obviously going to be going down. But it's still going to point to possibly areas that we need to improve as a school. So a little bit better representation of that. We have a graph here showing that starting in 2010, where the district was much higher than our school was, from then on our school has made a jump, has been steady or slowly declining, while the district and the state had declined much more rapidly. So that at this point our language arts program is doing really well, and we're well above both the state and the city averages. If we look at the math results, again, you'll see the numbers tested. They haven't dropped as substantially just because there's more students who are retesting because of the higher failure rate statewide. Year to year, there's more students who have to keep retaking the test, so a lot of those in that 42,000 for the state are retesters. And again, if we look at our results, you see that in the 2010-11, Woods Mill was much lower than the rest of the district and also lower than the state. Since then, we remained steady for the first year while the state and the city dropped. And then in the last 2 years, we've dropped, but not nearly as substantially as the other two areas. So we are actually now doing much better than either the city or the state. All right, from here, we're going to move on to our science results. And again, you'll see there's been a huge drop in number of students tested. And if you look at that graphically, you'll see that from 2010-11 through 2012-13, our results have been either in line or well above the state and district levels. In this last testing period, we are below the state and the city. However, our end value for that was only 5 students. So we need to look at that very suspiciously. Obviously, if you have 5 students, if we had one more person pass, we would have been at 40% and above everyone else. So until we get more data in for this latest testing, we're not really going to put a lot of emphasis on those results. And finally, we're going to look at our social studies, where again you see the numbers dropped, and they dropped significantly in number of students tested between 12-13 and last year, which again, part of that is the retest data isn't all in on that yet. If you look at our results here, it's a little bit more troubling. We started out well below the district and the state, and then 12-13 we scored better than the district, but still well below the state. And then in this latest round of testing, we've been below the district and the state again. So for that reason, we're going to go ahead and we're going to use that as the focus of our more detailed analysis of the data. When we look at our results, we're doing better than the district and the state in math and language arts for the last 3 years. Science, we were doing better, and then in this latest test, we dropped off, but again, with only 5 students, that's not really a significant result. So the only place where we've been consistently lower than the state and not much higher than the district has been in social studies, so that's going to be our area of emphasis. So we're going to start out by looking at whether being economically disadvantaged is a contributing factor. And if we look at that, the numbers are very, very similar for our economically disadvantaged and our non-economically disadvantaged students, with the exception of the 2012-13 administration, where the non-economically disadvantaged students scored much higher. Again, we have to look at the effect size on that because our end value there was only 6 students. So because of the small sample size, it can really skew our results. So I don't really think it shows a strong relationship between economically disadvantaged status and ability to score well in the tests. If we look at the ELL status, again, we have very small effect sizes. Our ELL population is never above 3. But other than the 2012-13 status, we haven't had any ELL students able to pass the social studies graduation test. So this may be an area that we want to look at even further. Finally, we're going to look at race and ethnicity. This, to me, is the most troubling statistic and the area we need to look at the most. Because when you look at our end, even if we throw out the white sample because that's only 6 students and the Asian is only 3, if we're just comparing our 2 largest populations, our largest population of Hispanic students is meeting or exceeding the standards at a rate of a little better than 66%, while our second largest population, our black students, are only passing the test at a rate of 10%. So to me, that looks like an area we need to look at. So with that in mind, some things that we want to consider, we've gone through, talked about how math and language arts really aren't areas we're struggling in at the moment. Science, we need to keep an eye on it. We need to find out whether that really is a problem with last year's results or whether it's just that the data's not all in yet. And in social studies, we have to figure out whether ELL is an indicator or not. And we definitely need to look at what the cause is for the lack of success for our black students. So with that in mind, discussion questions for us to think about before we meet to form our action plan are what factors we have that we think would be responsible for that lack of success, and is there really a link between ELL status and Georgia high school graduation performance on the social studies test. So if we can just discuss those when we get back together to formulate an action plan, hopefully we can brainstorm a lot of ideas and try and get some curriculum changes in place so that moving forward we can close that gap.